Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today, on a rather rainy, gloomy day, I am coming to you with my last book roundup, wrap-up type of video for 2023, and that is my favorite rereads. If you are new to the channel, welcome. I'm glad that you are here, and I have done several videos that are all kind of best ofs and wrap-ups over the past week or so. A couple of weeks I did mysteries, dystopian fiction, quiet gems, best of, new reads, and then this is the best rereads. So as the channel name indicates, I do love to reread books. My estimate, based on absolutely nothing but sheer feelings, was that I read about 25% rereads and the rest are new to me reads in a given year. Like I said, it was not calculated in any manner because I don't like doing math. But I did decide to actually run those stats since I was at the end of the year and I could see how many books I read and do it. And I was actually pretty close. It was about 23%. So I was a little bit under my vague sense, but it was pretty close for someone who doesn't like math and won't do any. So it's like I got a built-in calculator, I guess. Yeah, secret math genius. Very secret. I think rereading is really sort of a separate kind of reading. So I didn't want to combine the list together in my best of because it would really skew it. For me, if I'm going to reread a book, I probably already liked or loved that book enough that I want to experience it again. Occasionally, the precipitating reason is to participate in something like a book discussion or a club or a buddy read or a challenge where maybe I wouldn't have picked that book back up at that moment, but I'm still kind of happy to read it again. Other times it's just an all-time favorite that I'm going to reread with some sort of regularity. But at any rate, their odds of making it into a list are higher than books that I have never tried before and don't know whether I'm going to like or not. So, separating the lists. I have picked out, I don't know exactly if this is, I can't remember if I ended up with like 10 or 12, but I have a stack of books that I reread and loved again in 2023, and I'm going to talk about them. And they're not in a ranking order. I'm just going to kind of I'll talk about the reasons that I read each one or the circumstances as I go through the list. And all of these are books that I highly recommend if you have never read them before, and even if you have, read them again. That's kind of the point of the whole video. All right, let's see what I have. All right, the first one, I have talked before about the fact that I don't read a ton of nonfiction, and I have a goal in 2024 to read at least one nonfiction book every month. To my surprise, I actually did read 12 nonfiction books last year, but they were kind of clumped up, especially towards Nonfiction November. So I want to spread it out, and hopefully I will read more than 12 by making sure I read at least one a month. And I wanted to choose one of them for my best rereads. And then I found out I only reread one nonfiction book, but it was a good one. And it was Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. Harriet Jacobs was an enslaved woman in the South in the 19th century, and she had an unusual type of escape where she did not, well, her owner thought that she had run away, but really she never left town, and she hid in a couple of different people's homes in their basements or their attics or their sheds, and she did not want to be separated from her children. She doesn't stay there forever, but I don't want to kind of tell the whole sequence of events. She speaks so powerfully and eloquently about the precarious and dangerous and heartbreaking status of enslaved women and the lack of choices that they have about where they live, what happens to their children. Her perseverance, her strength of will, her love for her family, all of it is just so compelling in this short narrative that she wrote later on as a memoir. So if you have never read this book, I strongly recommend it. How many times am I going to say strongly recommend in this video? It's already happened 2 or 3 times, so I don't know. You could make a bet right now and see what happens. Next one I want to talk about is actually a trio, because I deliberately wanted to read these 3 books, reread them close together, and find out what that experience was like and what kind of other thematic and plot points I might see and patterns I might find by reading these books. They're not a series, but there are overlaps and interrelated themes, characters, etc. And that is these 3 books, the 3 most recent books written by Emily St. John Mandel. If you've been on this channel for a while, you know I'm kind of obsessed. And if you just got here, I'm kind of obsessed. And I started with Station 11. And I loved Station 11 when I originally read it, when it was a new release. And the rereading just catapulted it into a whole new stratosphere. And it is one of my all-time favorite books. This is going to be one of the books that I reread a lot. This is a near perfect novel. I don't think anything is perfect, but this is pretty damn close. This book was first published in 2014, and that's when I read it. And reading it again after the COVID pandemic, and the fact that this book deals with the aftermath of a severe pandemic that kills about 98% of the Earth's people. It just hit in a whole different way. The nostalgia and the bittersweet memories that the older people, the adults in the community have about the way life used to be, the children's sense of disbelief at hearing stories about electricity and air conditioning and computers, the theme of the importance of art and culture and beauty and sustaining the human condition. It's about a group of traveling actors and musicians who kind of move in a little caravan circuit across part of Canada in 20 years after this pandemic has occurred. Some parts of the book are about when the pandemic unfolded, and there's a number of characters and times and places that have separate stories that eventually weave together and all relate to one another. And the Station 11 in the title refers to a partially finished graphic novel that is in the possession of a couple of characters, written by another character. I can't tell you too much about it without giving away some of the beauty and the surprises in this novel, but I have talked about it time and again. And if you like the kind of books I read, but you haven't read this, I strongly recommend it. Hurry and get yourself a copy. I was so excited this year when I found a hardback copy because I didn't have my own, and now I do. And so I'm ready to just read it relentlessly. Then I went on to The Glass Hotel. This is not a sequel. It's not related. The only relationship in here, there's a couple of characters that appear in the first book, and there's a reference to that flu, but in this case, it's sort of an alternate reality where that flu sort of happened, but it didn't take hold and wipe everybody out. And there's a couple of characters who are alive in this book who don't make it in the first one. Won't tell you who they are, but this one is mostly realistic, fairly contemporary fiction. I think it might be set in the 90s or early 2000s, and it has to do with a Ponzi scheme. That makes it sound like it might be boring, but it's not. It's about all the people that are affected by this one man and his scheme, and about a young woman who is his partner and her personal story, her brother who's a musician. Her books are really hard to describe because all of them have these intricate plot and character webs, and I love them, but I have the hardest time selling them because they're complicated, but they're not confusing, and they're realistic and really emotional, but then there's something weird, like maybe a ghost or something, but it's really good. And then I went on to Sea of Tranquility. This one's science fiction. There's time travel. There's a pandemic again, and there's simulation theory. It is science fiction. And weirdly enough, the one that is the most straightforward and the science fiction one have a lot of connections, a lot of characters in common. Some of them are playing out in an alternate way than they did in the first book. I love time travel. I need to move on or this video will be endlessly long, and I could have just made a video about just these books, but we must continue. The next one is Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead, and I read this to prepare for his second book that is a sequel to this book called Crook Manifesto. That one was in my runners-up in my best of video. Harlem Shuffle, he has a little trio planned. Harlem Shuffle, Crook Manifesto, and then the next one. This one is set in the 60s. The next one, Crook Manifesto, is in the 70s, and I hear that the third one will be in the 80s, and it's about a furniture salesman named Ray Carney, who is a black husband and father living in Harlem in the 1960s, and he tries to play it straight most of the time with his furniture business, trying to save up to move into a nicer apartment with his family, battling with his in-laws that are wealthier and look down on him and are judgmental because of his checkered family past. His father was a notorious criminal in the area, and Ray has a little bit of dad in him. Every now and then, to make some extra money, he accepts some stolen goods and fences them out and kind of washes the goods. He gets in a little over his head with one of these schemes in this novel. It's kind of a heist gone wrong story, and also has a lot to do about his family ties with his cousin Freddie. And there's just so many nice textures and layers to this book. You get the setting is so crisp of 1960s Harlem, like somewhere. I mean, I guess I've been to New York City, but I've never been to the time and place that he's describing, the conflicts and the tensions, and then the story itself. There's humor, there's tragedy. There's the character Pepper's introduced that I've talked about it's one of my favorite characters. Very different than his like something like Nickel Boys and Underground Railroad, which I also loved, but a whole different vibe here and really a fun read. Now the next book is a fantasy, and I don't read a lot of fantasies. I'm much more attuned to science fiction. But every once in a while I do read one, and in this case I reread The Hobbit, which I really love. And in fact, I am wearing my Hobbit shirt today. Let me show you. Ta-da! It's the Hobbit meal stuff. And I could totally fit in with the Hobbit lifestyle. I like the way they live. I like the way they eat. I like, big shapeless sweaters. I'm all there. All right, but The Hobbit is the book that precedes the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And it is, of course, the tale of Bilbo Baggins, who is selected for a courageous journey and along the way finds a very special piece of jewelry. And it is just a joy to read and reread. I think I've read this one. I first read it when I was a kid, and I read it a couple of times on my own as an adult, read it with my daughter when she was the age to enjoy it. Anyway, it's just, it's my favorite of that series, but I think I will go on. I wasn't in the mood to immediately proceed to Fellowship of the Ring when I read it, but I think I will read it this year, just kind of go back into that Middle-earth world. Now, another author that I have on a kind of mental carousel, or maybe a lazy Susan, maybe a Lady Susan, is Jane Austen, and I read Persuasion again. It wasn't associated. This was, when I read this, it wasn't during Jane Austen July. I just kind of read it randomly when I was in the mood because it's one of my favorites. And I kind of change up what my favorite one is. Every time I kind of make my way through the novels again, I sort of change it up. The only one that I've never reread is Mansfield Park because I didn't like it the first time, but I'm starting to feel drawn to give it another chance because that was so long ago and I'm older and different and I might see it differently. I might be sleeping on something that I actually would love to put in my mix. So you can let me know about your thoughts about Mansfield Park. But that's always been like the odd one out that I never make it back around to rereading. But I'm not talking about Mansfield Park right now. I'm talking about Persuasion. I'm trying to get this whole set together of these cloth-bound classics of Jane Austen, but I'm only partway there. Ooh, cue the Bon Jovi. But anyway, Persuasion, I talked about it in my Quiet Gems video. It is a more reflective piece. I mean, we do have some marriage plots in there, but it's like a quieter, more thoughtful novel than some of her other ones. It's not, it doesn't have all of the humor of Emma or the big family of boisterous goings on of Pride and Prejudice, but there's just something very satisfying about rereading Persuasion, knowing how it's going to end. I really enjoyed it this time around, the friendship that she had with a character whose name I have to look up, the visiting friend who is grieving for his wife, and they have a lovely little friendship over their love of books. His name has completely fallen out of my mind, even though I've read this book like 4 times. I'll put it on the screen. But I really love that little side piece. And, you know, some people kind of nudged her towards him. And no, it was just a lovely friendship. Oh, I enjoyed that all over again. And guess what? I strongly recommend it. And then I'd have to hold up this omnibus of E.M. Forster because I participated in the Forster read-along this year, which was such a fun event and such a mixed bag. Reading all of Forster's novels and a bunch of short stories, and it was all over the place. There was books I loved, there was DNFs, there was a startling, interesting short stories, and one that I'm picking out as one of my favorite rereads is A Room with a View. It's just the most charming, fun, satisfying book. It does have some interesting themes about women's independence. It's not bogged down with any superfluous stuff. It's just a little jewel. It's light, but not too fluffy. I debated whether to highlight that one or Howard's End, and I really got a lot more out of Howard's End this time around, but as far as sheer joy of reading, I gotta go with Room with a View. It's about a trip to Italy in the early 1900s and falling in love with somebody that nobody has selected for you. Just romance and confusion and independence. All right, so this is the book of all of Jane Austen's novels that I am using. I've had this since the 90s and it's been very trustworthy, but if I ever finish amassing all of my separate penguin cloth-bound classics, I will give this to a new home. Hopefully I won't keep this one and all the others. I have a bad habit of that, of getting like attached to my old copy, and then I just have more copies. But I read for not nonfiction November, Angelia. It was Jane Austen July. Jane in July. Is that what it was called? It was July. And I read Northanger Abbey. Again, this was tied with Room with a View as far as just charming, satisfying, uplifting, fun reads. Love Northanger Abbey and all of the play on Gothic novels, and I love Henry Tilney, probably my favorite leading man in Jane Austen. And he's progressive. He truly enjoys the company of women. He can talk about books. He can talk about fashions. He can poke fun at himself and others. He can take a joke. So, and he's not socially awkward. Like you have to withstand Darcy for almost the whole novel. So anyway, I love Northanger Abbey. But let's turn the tone to something dark, depressing, and devastating. That was Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I chose this for Remember December as a book I wanted to see how I felt about it the second time around. I felt strongly about it. I felt it kind of just tore me up one side and down the other. It's so emotional. It's another book where you can't really tell a lot about what it's about without giving away some key things that part of the beauty is the slow reveal. But basically, it's about a young woman named Kath who is a caretaker to people, a medical caretaker, and she's reflecting on her upbringing and her friendships, especially with two important people in her lives, Ruth and Tommy, and they all grew up in an unusual boarding school in England and gradually learned that they were destined for a certain role in society. It's an absolutely stellar novel, and I love it so much. And another one where I'm so excited that I found a nice hardback copy to call my own. All right, so last but not least, the book that I've read more than any other times of any book, Catcher in the Rye. I'm not going to talk a lot about it because I talk about it so much. I work it into every event, every tag, everything. I love Catcher in the Rye. If you read it way back when and you didn't really like it, give it another shot. It improves with your age. Some of the content doesn't age well, but the overall story and the character and everything improves when you get older. Catcher in the Rye. All right, that's it. What did you reread this year and how did that work out? Let me know in the comments, and I will be back soon for Friday Reads. Have a great week. Bye.